Yeah, so tonight I want to talk about translation and web. Let's start a bit about me. I worked in Silicon Valley a couple of years, and then I decided to become a digital nomad and travel around the world while developing some products. Right now I'm the founder at polyblog.io. So the agenda today, first we will talk about why translate all the things, and I will show you some statistics about languages, and then we will talk about how to translate websites. So this is a very, let's start with the questions that everyone in Europe doing startups has to face. Which language should I start with? This, I feel, in the United States is a topic not much spoken of, but in Europe you start. If you're in Spain, you ask yourself, should I start in Spanish or should I start in English? And it's a very common question. So let's start with a very nice chart. This one shows all the languages of the world based on the number of people speaking it. It counts only, I guess, the maybe primary speakers. And so China is like the biggest, and then there's like Spanish, English, Russian, Hindi, Portuguese, Italian, and so on. Then there is like another, this I guess maybe people have an understanding of this, and then there is another one that people don't understand much, and this is instead about the languages of the internet as like the amount of content that is currently online. And then there's a huge disproportion because actually more than half of the web is in English. And then all the other major languages, they're like kind of smaller percentages. So this creates a very big gap between what's actually on the internet and what people talk about. These other charts visualize it more clearly. The numbers are slightly different because all stats depends on the data set, but you can see the trend that they're kind of close to the previous stats. So here you can say that the English, the blue circle around is actually the content on the internet. So there's more content than people based on like the percentage. And then is the same with Russian, maybe a bit of like push from the government to have more content in Russian. But then all the other languages, there is more people than actual content on the web. And then this creates a great opportunity. Here is another very interesting map of the world. Maybe you saw it. So usually you see the Mercatonen map that is like based on how big is the surface of the countries. And then this is a map about how many millions of people there is. So each square is 500,000 people. And so you can see it's completely distorted from what you remember. Here India is huge. And then Europe is also pretty big. Scandinavia on the top is like super tiny if you check, because there's not actually a lot of people. And Canada too, if you see on the left, Canada is like a line on top of the United States. This it gives you great perspective on like languages and where people are. It's like very different from the normal map. So then if you have to pick a language, what we said is just, all right, you saw these two stats, and a great, like a simple solution is just you pick the biggest languages. So you pick one of the biggest to start, or you think that one of the biggest is just like a good guess. And then though, if you see another stat, this one is about economy instead, is about the gross domestic product, which is like one of the many ways to measure like the economy and how much money flows into a country. And then here you can say that the shapes, they change it a lot. Like here the United States is like massive, and then Europe is pretty big, and South America is like at the bottom there. So this one, it changes a lot your perspective of which language should you choose for a business. Then, so you could say, okay, I will pick the biggest economies. Then there is like this other chart, very interesting. This is again gross domestic product, but per capita, so it's just divided by the amount of people there is in the country. And then here you see the darker blues, they are more per capita. So the United States, again, very big. Then there's like Scandinavia, Germany. Then other countries here, you can see fade them away in different ways. So you see like South America here is not so much faded away compared to the previous one where it was like very small. So here you might, you might have a lot of guesses, but then if you go by a hunch, you just saw all these stats, and then you think, okay, it seems the USA and English, they were kind of doing great across many of the stats that we've shown. So I will just pick the USA and English as a market. So then there is this other one. It's harder to find the numbers and super cool charts, but this one, I found only this one with the numbers, but it says unicorns by country. So unicorns are like startups with a $1 billion evaluation, and then United States here it says 865. Then if you see all the other countries, the numbers are like much smaller than that. So this one, it's like a pro and a con. You could say, okay, yes, so this confirms again the United States and English is a great place to do business, but you're also learning in this moment that there are already a lot of companies in the United States. So this also means that you would have a lot more competition going there. So a way to like solve all these maps is like a lot of different information seen from like a lot different angles is to apply the economic principle of supply and demand. So as an entrepreneur, if you're selling a new product, you want actually there to be low supply. So if I'm selling televisions, to me it's great if no one else is selling televisions because I have little competition to have to deal with. And then on the demand side, if there is high demand, for me it's like much better because people really want my product. So the best is if there is little competition and then there is high demand. This is like the best. It's like every entrepreneur dream in building a product. So then going back to languages and countries, you would want to choose a place that has high population, so there is a lot of people that you can sell to, but then also high purchase power, so then they have resources and they want to buy products, like I mean they have resources to buy your products. And then if there is a little web presence of your competitors, it's better. So here I guess I put together both a little but increasing web presence, because if your customers are not online, well, we're talking about web things, they're not online, they will never find your websites even if there is a lot of people there. So there are like a lot of things to balance together. And one of the ways we can take advantage of different prices and products availability across countries around the world. So the world is a huge place. Every country is different, there are a lot of pros and cons, and then we can choose the place that gives us the best advantage. There is another term to just say what I described. Maybe in the nomad community, this term is been made popular by Tim Ferriss, so it's called the geo-arbitrage. Geo-arbitrage is like taking advantage of the difference in living costs between different geographic locations. So one way to apply this, it can be applied in many ways, but one is simply for nomads, like you get paid by the United States, in United States salaries, and then you live in Thailand. So this is a form of geo-arbitrage. There are different living costs, and then you pick one that you like, and then you pick the other one. And I like to visualize this with a physics concept of the communicating vessels. So there are two glasses, then they're communicating, and then the fluid, because of gravity and air pressure on the fluid, then the water, it will just move from the glass on the left to the one on the right until they're both at the same level. So the way that I think about the geo-arbitrage, I think like if there are multiple glasses, and then what you want to do every time that there is a movement of something, you can build a tiny water mill at the intersection of the two glasses. So there's like water moving, you build your water mill there, and then the water moving, it spins the water mill, and then it creates force, energy, and with dollars. And it's kind of like a generic physics principle. Also, electricity is about electrons moving in a battery between two parts. So this is a generic principle, and it's kind of the same with money. Money tends to flow in this way. So I feel like now we saw a lot of charts, and we have like a lot of cool ideas, but still then the question is, which language should I start with? And so, yeah, we got a lot of numbers, a lot of stuff, and you can spend a lot of time. You can do always more research, and then you see a new angle, and then you're in a startup, you want to find the good one, but actually just sitting and doing nothing, then in the end is like not great. So, data is only useful if it gives you knowledge to go forward. So then instead, another approach is just like, let's do all the languages. So we will do all the languages, and then we still learned about all those concepts, and they will be useful in a way. But just let's pretend that we're going to make a website in all the possible languages. But how? I mean, now it's all nice. We're all like, okay, let's build it in all the languages. But of course, it's like much harder. So it's possible to build a website if we go forward with a term I say incremental translation. So with incremental translation, you don't have to do everything. All the languages, they don't need to be equally well translated. Some are more translated, some are less. So as a easy pick, as a startup founder, I think a rule of thumb many of you will have found by now is that if you start something, you usually do it in your native language and in English. And this is just the two basic ones. A lot of startups, they do like this. So that's why in the end, there's like a Spanish startup doing English and Spanish, a French startup doing French and English, but all the other languages are neglected. So instead of postponing them, another approach with incremental translation is just translate everything, all the content you have, you translate it with Google Translate. And then you incrementally improve on the machine learning Google translated the content once you have visits or profits from that language. So this approach, it's essentially something is better than nothing, or you heard this mantra in many ways, like good is the enemy of perfect, and there are like many ways to express this. But to give a practical example, let's say that you do it in Spanish and English, and then you don't do Indonesian, even though in one of the screens before show Indonesia is a huge country, it's 200 million. Almost no one translates ever stuff for Indonesia. But if you wouldn't translate it, no one would ever find you. If you translate it with Google Translate, instead maybe someone will find you. It will not be the best translation ever, but it's better that someone reads you than no one reads you at all. And the Google Translate, by the way, it's getting better and better. Every time you're going to try it again, you will feel like, oh my God, this is even better than last time. So, okay, this is nice, but how do we actually do that? So let's start really like from the beginning. How would you go about it in a new project, in a startup? One of the first things is actually, if you start any project, maybe you discover it by now, is that it's not a good idea to choose a company name and then try to find the domain for it. You will be like very upset by finding they're like all the extension, they're already taken. So it's just better, you can go on Namecheap or GoDaddy or like any domain provider, and then you just put in names until you find a name that is not taken. And names, they don't matter so much. Just pick a name that is free. If you're doing something tech, you can go with the .io. You can also go with the .co. That is a nice hack. I don't know if you knew. I mean, maybe you guys knew, but it's like a co is for Colombia, but then it's almost like the com. So that's the hack. But then I never know if people are going to try to write the M, then they don't find you. So I mean, there are pros and cons. Another approach I've seen some American startups, they write like get product or hello, say hello to. But I mean, this is a bit, I don't know, it's another approach. So the general idea is that you get the domain and then one domain to rule them all. So I know now I'm going to say some opinionated things, but I feel they're like 95% on the good direction, and it's just better to learn them like this and then maybe improve on them later. So if you buy the domain, it's just better to have one domain. So let's say you have example.com. To internationalize, you can do example.com/en, example.com/es, and then so on for like all the languages. They have these special codes. One idea that is not great is getting a domain for each language or each country. Why this is not great? Because in search engine optimization, every domain has kind of like a a domain authority, like a number that says how good it is, and if you have multiple domains, you spread your domain authority across different websites, and then it's just better to have one that appears on top than like a lot of smaller ones. Another thing is just subpath versus subdomain. So if you can choose, if you start a new project, example.com/blog, it's better than blog.example.com. So first of all, the one below blog.example.com might be, Google might think that it's a different website, so it might count them as two separate ones. And then also from a user experience perspective, it's better the /blog at the top. The only reasons why we were doing a lot of blog.example is because this one you can do it with DNS directly in the domain name system. You can point to a different IP, so it was just easier to point to a different machine with WordPress. But if you have the possibility, the one at the top is like better for SEO, better for user experience, and not you can still get it. It's not incredibly hard technically. Yeah, so this is exactly is what I said about now, an explanation. And now we're gonna talk about, like I just picked Stripe as an example because I knew they have great landing pages in multi-language. So this is the main landing page of Stripe. They have stripe.com, and then I guess my browser was in English and it appeared like that, or maybe they have the default as in English, but this is the English version. And then we go stripe.com/es. This is the Spanish version. They're very good. I mean, all the content is translated. They even translated the images, which is at the beginning, maybe you can just put portfolio photos and then a guy, you know, it doesn't matter. Otherwise, this I think is even harder because you have to translate the images. Here, another one, getting even, you don't have to get this point of detail, but just to show you how much Stripe cares. Here you have FR-CA, so it's French in Canada. So the local, this little string that you saw at the top, like /es/en, that's like a standard. Every language or every country has like a 2 letters digits that identify it. And sometimes you can only have the language, like we did before, or you can have a 2 parts locale made by the language dash the country. So in this case, the first part is not France, but is actually French in Canada. And this is to signify that you have the website, the words are going to be in French, but you might still need things specific to Canada. For example, Stripe is like a payment processor, so you need the Canadian dollars instead of showing euros for users in France. And now let's get to another part full of content, which is the blog/blog. This is all good in English. And then we'd go /blog/yes. And there is a 404 page not found. And so this part, why am I showing this? Is because Stripe is like one of the biggest companies right now in the world. They do multi-language super seriously, yet they don't translate their blog. So this is a huge opportunity, and I will show you a bit more about it. So why is Stripe and everyone else not translating their blog? It's because there is actually 3 types of content on the web. There is landing pages, mobile apps and web apps, and blogs, which is also content marketing. You might think that it's all text, but the text, actually this type of text, they're like quite different from each other. So no, I will talk here. Landing pages, they tend to be more, they tend to be a lot of strings, but they need to be closer to each other. If you do a header, you want the subtitle under, so they need to be close. In mobile apps and web apps, you have like a lot of buttons, but you don't care as much where they are on the page. And then on blogs articles, you're going to have a long content, like 1,000 words that they are just like talking about the same topic again and again. So here, let's talk about a bit more about the content marketing. So content marketing is just like another term essentially to say blogs that they target B2B businesses. So it's like a company talking about a topic for another company. The main idea behind the content marketing is that you write something interesting for your users, and then people will like you, they will respect you for what you provided as knowledge, and then maybe they will buy something else from you. This is like the general idea of content marketing. It's very good for search engine optimization and for long tail keywords. So if you want to be found on Google and one word is very competitive, like, I don't know, you're selling television. If you write television, it's too much competition, so you try to rank for stuff like the best TV to put in your toilet. And then you write an article about that, and then no one ever wrote, there's not a landing page about that, and then you're gonna rank, and then you get users for that specific, and Japanese people will love you, I don't know. But I thought, so I thought this was a coding meetup, yeah, but we're talking about marketing, and so let me show you some code. So now I guess the part why this presentation is very low on code is because on the web there are a lot of languages and you could implement these with everything, so I just pick JavaScript with like a Node and Express. But here the concept, the most important part is in green you can see the slash 2 dots language. And so this is essentially like a route. It's like a URL route, and it's a wildcard. It's gonna get all the parameters if it's EN for English or ES, and then you get it inside of your code, and then you do something with it. You put it in some HTML, and you call a magic function here called translate. And then this translate, you say you want to translate hello world, and then you want to translate it to English. Okay. So now let's see, how could we write this magic translate function? So in general, there are two main approaches to translate content. And one, you're gonna have a static file, which is a giant dictionary in JSON or XML. You write on the left side, you write it in English, and then on the right side, you write it in Spanish. So you do hello world, hola mundo, buenos dias mundo. Or you can have an API. And so the file in JSON or XML, it's like very easy to implement. You just need to create a file, and then you can just write it yourself, like a function that it just reads that file. The problem is that this way all your files about the languages, they're going to be in the same app. So this is what happens with Android and iOS. Every time you download an Android and iOS app, you download all the languages, all the translations ever made. They are already inside of the file, and you download them. Files are sent around, and they're big, and also the problem is that there are files. So if suddenly you want to translate, you want a human person check the translation, you need to send around this file. So you send it by Gmail, and then they send it back, and then what if there is a change? So you have to do a lot of back and forth, and then you don't know which is the latest, so it becomes a great mess. The other approach is, like, of course, harder to implement with APIs, but then the languages you can download dynamically only one language. So you check the language of the user or of the page, and then it's French. You only download the French on the go. You don't download all the other languages. This is also, since everything is somewhere in a database, you can build like some web interface, and the translators can use this web interface, and you don't need to send emails around. So these API, though, they tend to be a lot of work. So when people, either you usually do the static files on your own, otherwise once you start to have the API, it starts to be a lot of work. So you end up using an external tool. For landing pages, I feel the biggest one, there's like a lot of products and SaaS, but Contentful is probably one of the biggest and most famous. For mobile apps and web apps, there are online software as a service tools, but people tend to use iOS and Android library, which is in the end is just a static file, and then there is just a library that calls that file for you. So on blogs instead, WordPress is kind of like the big, almost all blogs are written in WordPress. And there are plugins to manage WordPress translation, but there is a problem. You can have one WordPress plugin, but you cannot have two WordPress plugins. But, I mean, I don't know if you ever worked with WordPress, but if you're touching something very, very important, the first plugin touch it, and then the second one does it too, and then they don't know about each other. So about the core plugins, you can have it's pretty much 2, and the translation one is a very big one, so then usually if you have another one, they're gonna argue, and then you have to be lucky to find the 2 that actually work together. So here we go back to stripe.com/blog/yes, page not found. They don't have, they decided that it was not worth it, or they couldn't translate it to Spanish or any other language. So at Waiterio.com is a previous company where I worked. We had a very big blog with around 100 articles, and our customers, they were from kind of a lot of languages and markets, so we had at least 20 languages. So 100 articles for 20 languages, that was 2,000, at least 2,000 articles, and it was very hard to manage. So we decided to build an internal tool to manage all these articles and translations. And and actually on Google Translate, fun fact is it's not even so easy to define what is a language. There is a sentence that says, a language is a dialect with an army, and but it's a bit geopolitical, but the way that I see language is if they're in Google Translate, it's what I care about. So right now there is around 98 languages on Google Translate, and that's a lot of languages. So we built this internal tool, which evolved into a separate product, which is today polyblog.io. So in polyblog.io, the main, this is like the core part, and you can see on the column on the left, English. Here you can see all the names of the original articles in English, and there's like right now in this screenshot 112 articles. And then every language, there is a symbol showing the status of the current translation for that language. And then here you can imagine all the permutation, because imagine here it keeps going and going with all the languages, and then also down. So it's like a massive table, but it's all stringed down to just like one icon to make it possible to manage so many translations. So the approach we had was like as little as possible. You start with no translation, you click on the X, it's automatically Google translated. There are some APIs we call with Google Translate, translated to Google Translated, and then you can click again to assign it to a human translator, and then once the human translator is done, the article is marked OK, human translated. So to explain this process, essentially, if you're starting content, you should write it in English or your native language. If you write it in English, English is a bit better. Another trick, by the way, for blogs, you don't necessarily need to write the content. You can hire writers. It's much easier to hire writers for English because there's like more freelancers available. And then also, you could write your own content in your native language, but then let's say, for example, you're German and then you want to translate it to Indonesian, then you would need to find the translators that translate to German to Indonesian. I don't know how many people there are on the planet for like every permutation. It would be very hard. So you would still need to do German, English, Indonesian. So if you can, you do it with English, and then you can translate it with Google, to your native language, and then you proofread it, and then you got both of them. Then the next step is Google Translate to all the languages. And you might have this feeling, always the fear of lunch, always the fear of things going wrong. But the truth about the web is that almost it's very hard for people to find your content. Almost you put out their stuff, almost no one will find you. So it's just better to put it out there, and it doesn't matter, it will get better over time. So even if you wrote the article in English or you might wait, I will wait, it gets better. And in practice, no, just Google Translate to all the 98 languages, and then someone maybe will find it anyway. And the trick though here is this: let's not settle for like a decent amount. You need to have analytics on your websites, which is like very easy. It's just one script, you put it in your code, and then you check it once in a while, and you will find out that actually you will have a ton of traffic from countries you would have never expected. For example, at Waitario, we started, by the way, I'm Italian, so one of my first products was Italian and English. And we discovered that Spanish was a great market in our company. And then another one that is huge now, for example, is Indonesian. So we would have never found out that Indonesian was a great market for our product, but we just Google translated. And some languages, for example, we thought, oh, Japanese or Chinese, they are going to be great markets because they're big countries. But then we actually didn't receive a lot of traffic. And then instead we received a lot from Indonesia and Portuguese from Brazil. So then you double down on the users that you receive the traffic. And this is a bit to answer the question, which language should I choose? You go for your native and English, but all the others, you don't have to choose. Just translate it to everything, and the users will tell you where you are wanted, and then you will go where you are wanted. Again, there is like a last step to double down. If you see not only they love you, then you translate to their languages and it's even better. Then there is a last step where you pay a SEO specialist, and then you can do a lot of SEO stuff. You optimize, you rewrite, you do research, and then you get even better. But it's about this incremental. You go up, up, and up when you are needed. So yeah, go where no one has gone before, and then so non-English content is the final frontier. Very little people are doing this. Thank you so much.